Hey there storytellers, welcome back to my channel. Today's video, as you can see, is going to be a monthly finishers video. Basically, I'm just going to talk about all the books I have finished this past month in July of 2020, and that's really all there is to it, so let's just get right on into it. The first book I finished in July was a nonfiction book called Don't Keep Your Day Job by Cathy Heller. This book is essentially sort of a self-help, self-motivation novel about why sort of holding on to your 9-to-5 isn't the best option for you when pursuing a creative craft of whatever variety is what you're really passionate about and what you're being called to do from the universe and from yourself. I liked the book. It wasn't a favorite. I have definitely read other self-help, self-motivation books of a similar vein that I have enjoyed more. It was by no means bad, but it tended to focus, to me it seemed, on doing things like starting a podcast or a blog. I guess I expected it to lay out a little bit more how one can go about not keeping your day job and pursuing a professional creative craft, and I thought maybe it would be a little bit more geared towards writers or artists. I'm not really sure what I thought going into it, but regardless, it tended to, like, there was a lot of quotes and examples to help solidify the author's points, and unfortunately in my case a lot of those quotes and examples were from people whose self-help novels I had already read, so I was already familiar with a lot more of the content than I expected to be, so that's why it wasn't a particular, great 5 out of 5 for me. It was just a solid read. I definitely think if you're interested in starting a website or a podcast or a blog and doing that vein of creative work, it's definitely a book that would be something I would recommend for you. It wasn't particularly author/writer centric, which is something that I was looking for when I picked it up. So if you're looking for something similar, maybe give it a shot and see if it helps you a little bit more than it helped me, but it would not be one that I would recommend for that specific need. The first fiction book that I finished in July was Cinder by Marissa Meyer. This novel follows a girl named Cinder who is a cyborg in the city of New Beijing. Essentially, she has an encounter with a royal prince and she gets enlisted to help him fix I'm trying to think, what is it called? She gets enlisted to help him fix his android, basically, and in the process she discovers not only some information she's not supposed to know, but some information that can totally alter the course of the country as they know it and the earth as we know it. She discovers this information about the Lunar Queen, the Lunars being a once group of humans who migrated to the moon to live and have since evolved and developed powers and have their own society with its own rules and belief systems. They're so far removed from human society on Earth that they're almost like two completely different things, despite the fact that at one point the Lunars, I believe, were human, if I remember correctly. This was one I really enjoyed. I don't generally do a lot of fairy tale retellings, only because I'm not a huge fan of fairy tales as is. I'm more into like mythology retellings or classics retellings. So this was a little slightly outside the vein of my usual pickups, but I've heard good things about the Lunar Chronicles, which Cinder is the first book in. So I decided I might as well pick it up. I was in a sort of sci-fi dystopian mood pretty much through most of July, so that's like gonna be a running theme, you'll see. I picked it up, loved it. I thought it was a really fun take on Cinderella, obviously, Cinderella. She's much more independent and strong-willed and self-sufficient than I feel the original Cinderella is, which is why I don't usually like that story. She's kind of waiting for somebody to save her rather than taking action into her own hands, which Cinder does. So I believe I gave this a 5-star review. So if you're into fairy tale retellings and sci-fi and slightly dystopian-esque vibes, this is definitely one to pick up. Continuing with the Lunar Chronicles, I read the second book next in July. The second book is called Scarlet, and it follows essentially Little Red Riding Hood, that fairy tale, but obviously her name is Scarlet, it's not Little Red. This novel kicks off with Scarlet wondering where her grandmother has gone. She's just up and disappeared. Nobody knows where she went, nobody knows why, and only Scarlet is the one to believe that this was not a runaway kind of situation. A lot of people dismissed it as her grandmother's crazy, she just ran off, and there was no foul play. Scarlet disagrees and continues to dig into her grandmother's disappearance when she meets a young man who goes by Wolf. Wolf is very contradictory as a character, without spoiling too much, but their paths cross and end up very much intertwined all throughout Scarlet's journey with Wolf and trying to find her grandmother and rescue her. We flash back, or flash sideways rather, to Cinder's story and her continuing plot, because they're in the same universe. Therefore, what affects Cinder's plot affects the plot of other characters, and everybody starts joining up. They start to sort of meet and all end up tracking down the same course. I'm trying not to give spoilers away in case you haven't read it. It's not like these are new books. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the Lunar Chronicles and have read them, so I could probably spoil it without ruining it for too many people, but I'm trying to avoid it. I didn't love Scarlet quite as much as I liked Cinder at first. I wasn't sure if I would end up giving it a 5-star review. I definitely did. It did get 5 stars from me in the end, because there were some twists that, while I expected, they weren't poorly done, if you know what I mean. So even though there wasn't really that element of surprise, I really liked how they were executed, and I thought it would be, if you weren't familiar with those kinds of stories and how those kinds of twists come up, they would be shocking for you as a reader if you were sort of delving into this world without having really read a sort of saga style story before. It would be something that would shock you. So I thought those were really well executed. Going slightly out of order just to keep it consistent in terms of the series that I am talking about, I am currently a little over halfway through Cress, which is the 3rd book in the Lunar Chronicles. It follows the main character, Cress, as she sort of is rescued from this satellite she's been living on, working for the Lunars, and it joins the journey of the other characters that we meet in Cinder and Scarlet. Cress is by far my least favorite, like, main girl to follow. She's, I think, a riff on Rapunzel, based on a very description of her hair being very long and wild. She's got a whole half of another book to sort of bump it up, but I anticipate finishing that in the next day or so, so I'm including it in this final wrap-up since I'm filming it a few days prior to the end of July and I anticipate finishing it. I obviously can't give you my final review of it because I haven't finished, but I'm hoping that Cress ends up being more of a favorite of mine, but she may not. It's okay. Not every book in a series has to be a favorite. So the last 3 books that I read in July were the Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins. If you've been living under a rock and have missed the wild hype around the Hunger Games when it came out, I missed it for the books, didn't for the movies. then you might not know that the Hunger Games series follows a girl named Katniss Everdeen who lives in District 12 in an area of a country called Panem, once known as North America. According to where District 12 is described as, Katniss lives in sort of the Appalachian area, so East Coast-ish, but in the mountains, in the forests. Katniss volunteers for an annual event known as the Hunger Games, where the capital selects 2 tributes, a boy and a girl from each district in their country, to participate in the Hunger Games, which is essentially a gladiator-style battle to the death with only one victor. Katniss volunteers for her younger sister Prim, who is initially the one to be reaped, and Katniss wants to protect her, which is why she volunteers. Along with Katniss is Peeta Mellark, who gets reaped as the boy tribute for District 12. This first novel follows them in the 74th Annual Hunger Games, in which they build a sort of tentative alliance based on a steamy, romantic ploy that Peeta and their mentor Haymitch come up with to sort of make Katniss look more desirable and help her get sponsors and be protected when she's in the arena. It follows them as they battle it out in the Hunger Games, taking out opponents as they can, sort of staying alive as they can, and in the end, again, it's kind of a spoiler, sorry, I feel like if you haven't read them yet, you're at least familiar with what happens, because the movies are out, the movies are popular, and even I've seen the movies in their entirety. So I'm not unfamiliar with the stories in the books, but the Hunger Games I think is the only one that I had actually read before. I had never finished the series. Regardless, Katniss makes a decision in the arena that forces the hand of the capital and allows 2 victors, both her and Peeta. And they basically go home and start to deal with the repercussions of the Hunger Games, both sort of in a mental and physical trauma sort of way, and in the sense of they've sort of upset the capital and they're gonna have to deal with whatever retribution the capital, and more specifically President Snow, deems fit for them. Following the Hunger Games, we have its sequel, Catching Fire. This follows Katniss and Peeta and Haymitch and Effie in the Quarter Quell, otherwise known as the 75th Annual Hunger Games. Because it is falling on a 25-year anniversary, they have special games called the Quarter Quell, in which usually the arena is something sort of wild that nobody's seen before. It's always more spectacular than previous years, and there's usually something wild or spectacular about the way the tributes are reaped for the event. In particular, for the 75th Annual Hunger Games, as sort of retribution for her actions in the 74th, President Snow decides to reap tributes for the games from the existing pool of victors in each district. And while many districts in sort of more affluent areas of the country have many victors to choose from to be reaped, District 12 has only had one still living prior to the 74th Annual Hunger Games, which is Haymitch Abernathy. And now for the 75th, there's Peeta, Katniss, and Haymitch. And since they have to have a boy and a girl, that means Katniss is going back into the arena whether she wants to or not. And Peeta ends up back in the arena with her due to volunteering in Haymitch's place. This is by far my favorite book, by far my favorite movie. Something about... It's funny, because in terms of things happening, it's really just setting in motion the big finale of the 3rd book. But for some reason, I really love this one a lot. and I think it's something, the arena is so wild and creative, and it's interesting to see the victors interact with one another, in addition to Katniss and Peeta forming a much more honest-based relationship in which they can explore their feelings for each other in a much healthier way, even though they're still sort of performing for the Capitol. Their journey to getting there, because it kicks off with them doing the victory tour from the 74th Hunger Games, and on that victory tour they start to get to know each other. So by the time they're in the games again, their relationship has started to be formed on a lot more solid footing. So I think that's where this ends up being a favorite for me out of the entire series, even though I love them all. And lastly, for the books I have finished in July, and last for the Hunger Games trilogy, we have Mockingjay. This follows Katniss as she deals with repercussions of a plot that was set in motion without her knowledge to make her sort of a figurehead for revolution. She ends up flipping the Capitol the bird at the end of the 75th Hunger Games by shooting an arrow into their force field and blowing up their arena. Katniss comes to, and she's dealing with the fact that District 12 is no more. She's dealing with the fact that her family and her are relocated to District 13, which everybody thought had been blown to bits, but lo and behold, is fine and thriving. She's dealing with the fact that the Capitol has some of the victors that weren't rescued from the arena, Peeta included, and she becomes more and more entrenched in the Mockingjay persona and Rebel Alliance work as Peeta continues to make more and more propos for the Capitol. Katniss is making propos for the rebels, trying to inspire people in the districts to rise up against the Capitol and fight oppression, and Peeta is doing whatever he can to stay alive, and that's making propos for the Capitol. There are other tributes being tortured and doing and saying whatever they can, but Peeta is by far the most prominent one, and the more Peeta deteriorates visibly in condition, the more invested Katniss is in doing what she can to rescue him and help the rebel cause, because she believes that will help them eventually evacuate Peeta and the other tributes. And they do. Just when she thinks she's got Peeta back, he's literally in front of her, but farther than ever away in terms of mentally connecting and emotionally connecting, is nowhere near on the board. So she's dealing with Peeta trying to kill her, Peeta not being himself. This was a really good one. I loved the whole series. I loved the movies always, so I had no doubt whatsoever I was going to like the books just as much. Like I said, Catching Fire is my favorite, probably followed by Mockingjay. Hunger Games is very good, but it is initially just the thing that's kicking off everything else, so it doesn't hold quite as much punch for me emotionally. The Hunger Games were five star for me. I loved them. I read those in anticipation of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes that has just recently come out, that follows President Snow in his younger years prior to being president, and I definitely really wanted to read that. I was so intrigued by that as a concept. I really like President Snow as a villain. I think he's a really interesting character, so having something focused on his younger years and getting that sort of snapshot into events that helped make him who he was by the time Katniss meets him is something I wish more authors did with characters, especially villains. That is it for this week's video. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by leaving a like down below, and let me know what books you finished in July, and if you have any that really struck your fancy, blew your mind, made you not want to put it down, made you want to reread it again the second you finish, please let me know down in the comments. I love to get some more recommendations for things to read. But if you would like to keep up with me and all of my bookish adventures, you can go ahead and click the subscribe button, or you can always ring the little bell so that you don't miss a beat. I am going to go. Bye!